ॐ गणपते नमो नमः सिद्धिविनायक नमो नमः अष्टविनायक नमो नमः गणपति बाप्पा मोरया।
Sonia, Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Chirendra, Jai Swami Narayana, Sayam. Om. Om. Om Bhurvasvaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimai Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Om Bhurvasvaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimai Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Om Bhurvasvaha Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimai Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. As you can see from my next screen, very sad. Our legendary singer was laid to rest with full state honors on Sunday in the presence of her family at Mumbai Shivaji Park. Words cannot define a legend like Lataji. Only music can perhaps whisper to her everlasting greatness. The Nightingale of India, a voice which was resonating with and brought joy and happiness to millions and around the world. I am anguished beyond words. The kind and caring Lata Didi has left us. She leaves a void in our nation that cannot be filled. The coming generations will remember her as a stalwart of Indian culture, whose melodious voice had an unparalleled ability to mesmerize people with her voice. May God bless her soul in eternal peace. Heartfelt condolences to her family and to friends. Once again, Women to Women welcome you all. Can we just give half a minute of respect, of silence for Lata Didi. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you very much, all. Once again, I apologize. As we all know, that we meet in the first week of the month, but as Caroline was away, this is why we had to fall on the second week of the month. I'm sure you're all looking forward to question her and to hear the new things, all about portions, how much we must eat, and cholesterol and fat, how much fat we should reduce ourselves as well. That will help us lose weight. Can I introduce Caroline? I'm not sure if Daksha is here. I can't hear you.
Sorry, yes, Thatcher's here. I've spotted her. So thanks,
Oh,
Panna.
yeah.
Actually, I might be about to contradict some of the things you just said there, but hopefully I'll illuminate everybody. Yes, I apologise. My holiday got slightly pushed because of the French. I went to France, and because they were messing about, not letting us in, it ended up getting pushed back a week. So I do apologise, but I've got the first Tuesday of the month in my diary now going forward. So hopefully we won't be messing you about again for a while. So it's lovely to be back, and actually it's great to see the numbers tonight. There's a huge number there. So I'm kind of assuming that maybe we've got some new people in. So obviously we'll try and address questions. We can't go on too long.
Not too long today.
But what we normally do for anybody that is new is, while I'm speaking, if things come to mind, use the chat box facility on the screen to put questions into the chat box, and Daksha and Panna will keep an eye on that, and then we'll try and address all the questions at the end. So as Panna said, I am going to deal with talk about portion control, or how much you should eat, but I'm actually going to do it the other way around. I'm going to talk about cholesterol and fat first, and this came up I think in our WhatsApp group, and that's the other thing to say to anybody new. Make sure you get to join the WhatsApp group, because in between the sessions we can address other questions and find out sort of topics that are confusing people and that we might be able to address in the next session. And cholesterol came up. Somebody was very concerned that some of the stuff I've been saying in previous weeks perhaps contradicts a little bit about what you get told by your GPs, or what's the commonly perceived understanding of fat and cholesterol that's rather been promoted over the last few decades. So I'm going to address the whole cholesterol and fat thing, and then go on to talk about how much you should eat. Hopefully it all makes sense. So I'll just share my screen to get my slides up, and hopefully go through these. And as I say, any questions while I'm talking, put them into the chat box. Okay, so just a little disclaimer, as always. I know that Panna's also got a general disclaimer about the meeting. We are here meeting as friends. I'm here, despite the fact that I am a retired nurse, I'm here not to give you medical advice per se today. I'm here to pass on information, latest research findings, and maybe help you to understand a little bit better some of the issues around nutrition. But I'm not here to be very specific and give individual medical advice. If you have got medical conditions, and particularly if you're on medication for any of those conditions, and you're thinking of radically altering your diet, then it is important to make sure your GP or practice nurse are aware, particularly for conditions like hypertension and diabetes, because if you are on medication and you do alter your diet and hopefully get improvements, then it may be that your medication will need to be altered, reduced, changed, or even, we hope, some people are able to come off their medication with good dietary interventions. But please don't do that on your own. Do it in conjunction with your medical advisors. So, as I say, cholesterol is the topic that I'm going to cover first. And there's a huge amount of misinformation out there about cholesterol. Cholesterol has been demonized over the last few decades. And I think a lot of people don't understand that cholesterol is an essential part of the body. It's an essential molecule that forms a hugely important part of all of our cells, particularly the brain. And there's a nice statement here. A chap called Dr. John Abramson from Harvard, who says that cholesterol is an enormously complex molecule, and to think that you can just pull it out of the body and not have consequences is ridiculous. It is such bad science. And the problem is it's been oversimplified, and people have blamed cholesterol for causing heart disease, when in fact it's not the cholesterol that's doing the damage. And I'll go on to explain more about that in a minute. So please remember, cholesterol is essential to the body. It's a very important ingredient to all of our cells. And indeed, there's been lots of good research in recent years that has shown that the cholesterol and the idea that it's calories in, calories out that are affecting our health. Both of these hypotheses are really shouldn't be considered any longer as important. It's the quality of what we eat that's important, not the amount of specific calories that we consume or the individual types of fat that we consume. It's the overall quality of the diet, and getting back to really good naturally occurring real food, rather than, unfortunately, a lot of the highly refined foods that have come into our diet in recent years. So the cholesterol myth, if you like, that has led so many people to fear it, was really born in the 1950s, 1960s, and then the food industry got hold of the whole thing and demonized fats, when in fact fat is a very important part of our diet, and cholesterol was singled out as the part of fat, if you like, that was so dangerous. And this is simply not true. In amongst all of that, eggs got a huge amount of bad press. When I was a young girl, many of you, I'm sure, if you grew up in the West, you will have seen adverts about going to work on an egg, going to work on an egg, i.e. eggs being an important part of breakfast. And eggs were seen as healthy in the 60s. Then this whole fat thing and the cholesterol thing came, and eggs, of course, are full of cholesterol, so they were demonized, and we were told we shouldn't be eating eggs. But actually, more and more modern research has shown that dietary cholesterol plays absolutely no part in blood cholesterol, or extremely small part in cholesterol in the blood. And so eggs have been given the sort of all clear, if you like. And in fact, I just thought this study was quite interesting. It was a big sort of a review of lots of studies and research on diet and heart disease, and it really exonerated eggs. And although it says here up to 1 egg a day, we've got other research that shows that several eggs a day are not harmful. But this one particularly I thought was interesting in that it looked at big populations and showed that moderate egg consumption is not associated with cardiovascular disease risk overall, and in fact is associated with potentially lower cardiovascular disease risk in the Asian populations. So far from being bad, eggs are actually shown now to potentially have a lot of preventive attributes. Eggs are absolutely full of very healthy vitamins, vitamin D, which particularly if you're vegetarian can be quite hard to get hold of. Also, if you are living in our wonderful climate and you don't get an awful lot of sunlight, vitamin D is incredibly important, and eggs are a really good source, as well as the B vitamins, which are incredibly important for our nervous system and many other parts of the body. So eggs are highly nutritious. They're very satiating. They help to make us feel full for longer, and despite the fact that they do have quite a lot of cholesterol in the yolks, they are not associated with increasing your risk of heart disease. So I really want to make that clear, because people are still frightened of eggs and fat in general, but particularly eggs. They seem to find it hard to shake off that myth. So I really want to reassure you that eggs are a healthy thing to eat, and they are especially important to say if you are vegetarian, because they're a really good source of protein and some of the vitamins that you miss out on if you're not eating meat. So I just like to pose a question at this point, that if you arrived at the scene of a fire and you've got the fire brigade have arrived and they're there with their hose pipes and they're helping to put out the fire, would you have any kind of thoughts in your head that the firefighters had something to do with starting that fire? So it might seem like a very strange thing to ask you, but basically this is what people have been doing with cholesterol. They've been assuming that cholesterol is found in the fatty plaques that block up arteries in unhealthy cardiovascular systems. Because the cholesterol is present, an assumption was made and encouraged by those that had vested interests in encouraging us to worry about fat. Because cholesterol was present in the plaques, people immediately blamed it for causing the plaques. But in fact, the cholesterol is a bit like the fire brigade. It's there as part of our response to inflammation. The inflammation that causes this blockage in the artery is not caused by cholesterol. It's caused by other things, which I'll describe in a minute. And the cholesterol is actually there as part of the body's attempt to reduce that inflammation. So the cholesterol is a firefighter, not the cause of the problem in the first place. And it's really important that we kind of get this straight in our heads. Cholesterol is not a baddie. It really isn't. So this diagram illustrates that to some extent. It shows this fatty plaque in the artery causing the potential blockage. But the things that will help to reduce it are actually a really good high fat, high healthy fat Mediterranean style diet. By that we mean a diet that has plenty of good leafy green vegetables, healthy fats like extra virgin olive oil, the fats that you get in nuts and oily fish if people eat fish, a moderate intake of the healthy dairy fats, and a diet that is particularly low in sugar and refined carbohydrates, because it's actually those two ingredients that drive the inflammation that you see causing the fire in this artery. That inflammation, as well as the other things that happen to respond to a diet high in sugar and refined carbohydrates, leads to insulin resistance. So the bottom half of this diagram shows you that insulin resistance is responsible for things such as high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and the stresses that cause cardiovascular disease. Not enough of the healthy omegas that you get in those healthy fats will also encourage this adverse response. Diets that are particularly high in fructose as well can lead to this fat and plaque development and inflammation. So it's other aspects of the diet that are causing the plaques to form. And the fact that cholesterol is contained within those plaques, as I said before, is not a reason to blame cholesterol for causing them. It's the other bad aspects of the diet that are leading to these fatty blockages. So inflammation is the problem, and insulin resistance is the term we use for when people are starting to head towards conditions such as diabetes. It's when the body has been stimulated to produce so much insulin because our diet is poor and containing too much carbohydrate. The body becomes resistant to insulin, and then we get high levels of insulin in the blood and high levels of sugar in the blood. And these are the things that lead to inflammation all over the body. Which can cause all sorts of problems, including cardiovascular disease. And during the inflammatory process, the cholesterol can be oxidized and form part of the debris associated with the inflammation, but it's not the cholesterol that's starting the problem. And the presence of polyunsaturated fats such as seed oils, and seed oils, for those of you that heard me talk before, are these highly refined oils that we were encouraged to eat instead of the healthier, naturally occurring fats. They encourage this inflammation as well. So a diet that's high in carbohydrate and these seed oils, vegetable oils, it is the problem, not the cholesterol. So cholesterol is absolutely vital to the body because it's necessary for hormone production. It's present in the bile acids, which help with our digestion. It is part of the membrane of absolutely every single cell in our body. Our brain needs oh gosh, sorry, the slide's gone slightly weird and I don't know why, but it needs all of the cholesterol in our body to function normally. Our brain needs, I think that's meant to say, a percentage of all cholesterol in our body. I really don't know why that's gone weird like that. Cholesterol is also critical for our bones. It's needed to help make the vitamin D that we get in our skin as a result of exposure to the sun and produce and actually turn that into the vitamin D that is then useful for our bones, teeth and skin. So cholesterol is absolutely vital for functioning of a healthy body. Now, for reasons that I don't fully understand, and again, I think it's vested interests over the last few years and probably to do with pharmaceutical industry and the statin industry, the fats in our blood have really focused on cholesterol, but what we should talk about is a lipid profile, lipid meaning fat, and it's the profile of all of the fats in our blood that are important rather than just focusing on total cholesterol. So cholesterol is the general term for those lipids, and they're divided into three basic groups, which is the low density lipoproteins, otherwise known as LDL. Now, LDL can be both large and small proteins or molecules, and it's the small ones that potentially can do some harm. Large LDL particles do not cause harm. High density lipoproteins, the HDL, is what people often refer to as the good cholesterol. And triglycerides are a form of fat, also known as, that can be referred to as TG, triglycerides. Now, triglycerides are formed in the liver, and they aren't formed from fat, they're actually formed from excess carbohydrate. When you eat too much carbohydrate, that gets broken down basically into sugar, and the liver converts that into fat. And this was originally intended for us as a human race when we didn't have ready access to food all the time. So our body is very well designed in order to cope with feast and famine. So we are naturally designed to be able to turn excess sugar into fat, store it in our liver, and it's there as a little bit of a supply for us when we haven't got access to food. The problem today is we have a constant excess of food, so we're constantly making triglycerides, and our liver is getting fuller and fuller of this fat. And non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is one of the most common causes of liver problems in the Western world today. And that's not as a result of fat excess, it's a result of sugar excess, and all carbohydrates turn to sugar. Now, ideally, we should have a higher ratio of HDL to triglyceride. And when our diet is unhealthy, it goes the other way around. And the way to get that ratio back to where it should be is not to cut down on dietary fat, healthy dietary fat, it's to cut down on carbohydrates. So it's really important that people understand that fat is not just fat, and eating fat doesn't just automatically turn to fat in our body. If we're eating the right amount of healthy fat, it's there to fuel our body, to help heal our body, to help do all sorts of important functions in the body. And the reason we get fat, i.e. overweight, and that we end up with fatty liver is not because we're eating too much fat, it's because we're eating too much carbohydrate, particularly in modern life, refined carbohydrates. So it's really, really important we get that straight in our heads. So, as I mentioned, insulin resistance is this phenomenon, this metabolic disease that is all too common now. It leads to obesity, it leads to type 2 diabetes, and it can lead to hypertension and other cardiovascular disease. People can have insulin resistance and not be overweight as well. If they're one of those people who don't necessarily easily put on weight, but their diet is poor, they can still develop insulin resistance. And we talk about people being TOFIs, that is thin on the outside and fat on the inside. So they can still be developing this fat in the liver and fat around our important organs, but not necessarily have lots of body fat. So if your diet is poor and you're skinny, it doesn't mean you've got away with it. You'll still be suffering all the ill effects of a poor diet and the stresses that puts on the body. But insulin resistance is, say, a result of a period of time of eating poorly, eating the wrong balance of nutrients. And that is what goes on to lead to the inflammation. And it's also associated with the predominance of these small LDL particles that can cause some problems around the body. But cholesterol, as in a general term, is not a harmful substance. And our ideal is to have a HDL-TG ratio that is in the healthy range. So what drives insulin resistance? Well, I've mentioned it several times already, it's sugar. And I'm not just talking about the white stuff that you might add to your tea or sprinkle on desserts. I am talking about all carbohydrates that end up being broken down to sugar. So if our diet is heavily carb laden, we will be pushing at that insulin driver, and that could lead on to insulin resistance. And really over the last 50 years, fat has taken the blame for what sugar did. There was a bit of a battle of the scientists back in the 50s and 60s. And the sugar industry was a very, very wealthy industry. And they managed to basically pay off all the important politicians and scientists to be silent about the damage that sugar can do and allow fat to take the blame. Suited a lot of people, a lot of industry, for people to worry about fat and not worry about sugar. And if you look at photographs in any of the Western, first world countries in the 1950s and 60s and even the 70s, if you see crowds of people, you will rarely see an obese person in those photographs. And then you start looking at pictures of people in the 80s and 90s, the noughties, and you will start to struggle to see the thin people. What happened in those years? What happened was the fast food industry, the pre-packaged food industry, the ready meals, all sorts of the snack industry, the fizzy drink industry, everything associated with high carbohydrate, high sugar has increased dramatically. The availability of all this kind of fast food and snacky food has just soared over those last few decades, along with obesity, diabetes, and all the associated risks. So it's not rocket science, but the problem is we've got vested interests that are trying to keep this quiet. So it is sugar that is causing all this problem, not healthy fat. So there are three kinds of fats that we find occurring in natural foods. By natural foods, I mean those that nature produces as opposed to a factory produces. And most fats, most products, should I say, that occur in nature will have a mixture of all three. So saturated fat has been demonized as being, you must avoid saturated fat. It's impossible if you eat healthy foods to avoid saturated fat because it will occur in nearly all of them. So we get a mixture of mono, polyunsaturated and saturated fats in healthy foods. Red meat is probably often singled out as the thing that is most heavily saturated fat, and yet it will have a mixture of all three, but saturated fat might be the more dominant sort. But something like coconut oil is actually just as dominated by saturated fat as red meat is. They're both healthy foods. So it's really important to not think about, is it monounsaturated, is it saturated, but where does it come from? Is it natural? Anything that has been processed in a factory is likely to be harmful, because the processing that they use to produce the end result damages the molecules and makes them much less kind to our bodies. So real foods have a mixture of all these fats, and we shouldn't get obsessed about saturated and unsaturated. We should be more concerned about, where has this food come from? Has it been produced by nature or a factory? So the role of fat in our healthy fat in our diet is, it does actually help you to burn more calories. We try not to sort of focus too much on calories, but actually, if you're satisfying your body with the right ingredients, then it will function better. It helps all your body's mechanisms to run properly. It helps you to absorb the fat-soluble vitamins, and this is something, again, that people forget, is that some of our vitamins are only available in a fatty substance, and if you avoid all fats, you are depriving yourself of some very, very important vitamins, such as A, D, E, and vitamin K. Vitamin K is particularly important for blood clotting, etc. Also, if you're eating healthy fats, it reduces the levels of unhealthy fats in the blood, because the metabolism is being satisfied with the right ingredients. And fat in a meal will improve your satisfaction and your satiation, and also dramatically improves the flavour of food. So you are going to be more satisfied at the end of the meal if you've had a meal that consists of an element of naturally occurring fat. And this will stop you from snacking on the less healthy foods in between meals. The real baddies in the fat world are these awful industrialized seed oils. So soybean oil, canola oil, corn oil, cottonseed oil, sunflower oil, peanut oil, sesame oil, and rice bran oil. Most of these have been produced by the seeds being processed with all sorts of solvents and different mechanistic processes to get that oil out. Why they were ever called vegetable oils, I don't know, because vegetables don't have oil in them. So quite how that terminology came about, I don't know. But you need to be really careful when you're purchasing oil. You want to make sure that what you're getting is cold pressed oil, or oil that has been minimally mechanized, and therefore it's just being squeezed out of whatever it was, the seed or the bean or the nut, as opposed to having to have all these dreadful chemicals and other industrial processes to make them. Trans fats, which are thankfully starting to disappear from our food, also known as hydrogenated fats, were an absolute horror. Originally, they were produced in industry for engines and all sorts of other mechanical processes that they ended up not being any good for, and somebody had the bright idea of putting them into the food chain. But we've now discovered that how harmful these can be, and they are dramatically being reduced. But the seed oils are still there. If you look at the oil shelf in the supermarket, as in this picture, you will see loads and loads of these vegetable oils, sunflower oils, etc. Even olive oil, you need to be careful, because you want to look on the bottle to make sure it's not a refined olive oil, because basically they take the cold pressed extra virgin, then the virgin olive oil, and then what's left they put through an industrial process, and you end up with refined olive oil. So it's really important that you try very hard to only ever buy naturally occurring oils, cold pressed oils, etc., rather than anything that's been through an industrial process. These industrial seed oils are pro-inflammatory. They're because of the processing that goes on. They have all sorts of toxins in them which really do drive inflammation in the body. I won't go into the fine detail about how they're produced, but it's pretty horrendous, and they then add stuff to them to make them look appealing in terms of colour, etc. And then when you heat them again to cook at home, you're kind of aggravating all these already noxious substances that are in there that make them toxic to the body. So just avoid if at all possible. They are associated with toxins that can be carcinogenic and also associated with some neurodegenerative diseases. So the advent of seed oils was really bad news for the human race, and we want to try and avoid them at all costs, which is another reason for avoiding refined foods or pre-packaged foods and ready meals and so forth, because very often they have been produced using these seed oils. So when you cook from scratch at home, you're in charge of what oils and fats you use. Ansel Keys is actually the man who led a lot of the research that led to the demonization of fat, but it's actually quite interesting to find some quotes from him that show that he actually knew that in the adult, serum cholesterol level is essentially independent of the cholesterol intake over the whole range of human diets. So he knew this, and yet he allowed the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry to carry on and demonize dietary cholesterol, even though he knew jolly well that it wasn't associated with blood cholesterol levels. And even in 1997, he wrote, "There is no connection whatsoever between cholesterol in food and cholesterol in blood. And we've known that all along. Cholesterol in the diet doesn't matter at all unless you happen to be a chicken or a rabbit." So obviously they've got different metabolism. And more recently, the fact that cholesterol in the diet has no impact on cholesterol levels or cardiovascular disease was reaffirmed when the American dietary guidelines actually have now claimed that cholesterol is not considered a nutrient of concern for overconsumption. And yet the myth continues because it was made such a thing of that people still think, oh, cholesterol's bad, fat's bad. And, you know, we really need to help people to understand that what's driving modern diseases is not the fat or naturally occurring fat, it's the sugar. So there are quite a lot of resources if you want to know more. There's pictures there of 3 books that I would recommend to anybody. You don't have to read them all, but they're all very helpful in understanding what healthy food is. POP Diet is written by Dr. Seema Malhotra, who's a cardiologist, and it really describes the sort of diet that will help to keep your cardiovascular system as healthy as possible. Malcolm Kendrick is a GP who has a huge interest in heart disease, and his first book was actually called The Great Cholesterol Con, because he very early on realised that cholesterol wasn't the problem and was trying to help educate people about that. He's finished his sort of big challenge, which was to write a book about what really is behind modern heart disease, and he's got quite a good sense of humour, so he's called the book The Clot Thickens. And it's very interesting. It's written for the layperson, so it's a good read if you're interested in that sort of thing. I've just put at the bottom the latest of Dr. Michael Mosley, who you may know from the television. He does an awful lot of interesting, particularly around dietary programs on the telly. He was the one that really came up with the idea of the 5-2 diet, the intermittent fasting, and he's done quite a lot of work with diabetics and different types of low carbohydrate diet and Mediterranean style diets for diabetes. And he's just produced this year this new book, The Fast 800 Keto, so looking at a very low carb diet as a way to help people to lose weight, but also reverse diabetes. And it's got some very interesting facts and information in there about diet, including the kind of things I've just been talking about fat and cholesterol. But if you don't want to read whole books, there's a couple of links there, and I know Panna will make these slides available to you all on the WhatsApp group, but there's some links there again about some basics. So dietdoctor.com, which is a really, really good website with lots of really good information about healthy eating. There's a quick sort of basics on cholesterol and dietary cholesterol that will reaffirm what I've been telling you. Dr. Asim himself has his own website, and he's got a little video of him talking about cholesterol and heart disease. That's a nice watch. And then also, if you don't want to read Malcolm Kendrick's whole book, there's a link there to a shorter article that he's written about why saturated fat cannot raise cholesterol levels. So they're all there to help you to understand that I've not just been making this up. And if you want to know more, there's some good resources for you. But that's the sort of fat side of things. Portion control, I was asked to talk about. Now, if you eat a healthy, real food diet, you shouldn't have to worry about portions. People worry about how much of this should I eat, how much of that should I eat. We want you to eat a well-balanced, real food diet to satiation. So we want you not to be hungry in between meals. Now, if your food, if your plate has the right balance of healthy fats and protein and leafy vegetables, you shouldn't be hungry. So if you are getting hungry in between meals, it's because your meals are not constructed with the right sort of balance of nutrients, if you like. And it's worth remembering that the human is the only mammal on the planet, other than domestic pets, who ever have problems with obesity. All mammals are born with an inbuilt drive, if you like, for the right amount of nutrition. And one of the reasons why humans are overeating these days is because we're not eating the right nutrition. We're eating an unbalanced diet, usually far too much carbohydrate. And that means our bodies are striving for some of the vitamins that you don't get from carbs, or insufficient protein, because protein is a driver of appetite. We need protein in order to maintain our bodies. Children and young adults need it for growing. Adults and older people need it for maintaining a healthy body. If we're not getting enough protein, our bodies will drive us to eat more. So it's really, really important that the balance of the meals that you eat is correct in terms, and that the essential ingredients of a healthy meal are healthy fats and protein and leafy vegetables that contain some of the vitamins and minerals that we don't get from the protein sources. If you've got far too much carbohydrate on your plate, that is not going to satisfy the protein needs, and it's going to drive up your blood sugar, which will drive an insulin rush, which will then rapidly lower your blood sugar and make you hungry again. So it's getting the balance right. So there isn't, for every individual, there isn't I can't say to you, you should have 3 ounces of protein on your plate, you should have 4 ounces of fat on your plate. It's about getting the right balance for you as an individual, and eating to satisfaction, not stuffing ourselves. I think we've all, one of the things we can do to help maybe modify our appetites if we are big eaters, is to go back to the sort of size of plates that many of us would have when we were children, because the plates and portion sizes have, again, by the food industry, been increased, and we kind of tend to think we need more than we actually do. But you shouldn't leave the table hungry, but you shouldn't leave the table stuffed either. And I mentioned table because we should be eating at a table mindfully, not eating on the go or eating in front of the television. We should be, chewing properly and thinking about our food and enjoying our food. And all of that helps, particularly if you're eating more slowly, for the body to get all the right signals that it has actually had enough. And we certainly shouldn't be leaving the table feeling so bloated that we have to undo our belts, etc., which is, again, something that has become a bit of a modern phenomenon. So portion control is a difficult one to talk about because everybody's different, and you can't overeat healthy foods. Most of us will find that we've got a tolerance level of so much fat, so you're unlikely to overeat on fat. Protein is something we worry that people, particularly if you're vegetarian, you may be going short of. So you need to look at the construction of your plate in the terms of what's the balance there of healthy fats, protein, and the rest. And you will naturally get carbohydrates through vegetables. You don't have to have carbohydrates in the obvious form of bread and rice and pasta. That's absolutely not essential on a plate. But unless you've got diabetes, there's no problem you having very small amounts of those things. But in order to be satisfied, you need the protein and the fat. So, as I said, if you were genuinely hungry after a meal, then that meal did not contain adequate nutrition, and you need to have a think about that. The most nutrient-dense foods for those that eat meat and poultry are obviously those particular foods, and seafood. All fish is really healthy and nutritious, particularly oily fish. The non-starchy vegetables, eggs, as I've mentioned, are extremely useful, particularly if you're vegetarian and you do eat eggs. They're a really useful source of protein and healthy fats. And again, dairy products, full fat dairy products. Whenever we talk about dairy products, we are only ever talking about full fat ones. The low fat or no fat yogurts are, again, processed. They've had their structure altered in the factory, and they will contain all sorts of ingredients to make them palatable, because the fat's been taken out and they are not good for you. So go for full fat dairy products, and cottage cheese is quite good as a protein for people who don't eat meat. And then if you do need to rely on vegetable sources of protein, then soybeans and lentils are a good source, but be aware that they will always have a carb content as well. So you need to look for the lower carb, higher protein versions of nuts and legumes and beans to help satisfy your appetite without overdoing the carbohydrate. The least nutritious foods are foods that combine carbs and fat. Now, nature very rarely combines those two. You'll either find carbs in nature, such as in vegetables, where you've got some carbohydrate and a little bit of protein, or you'll find meat, which is protein and fat. But you won't find nature generally producing carbohydrates and fat in one product. But unfortunately, most processed food, because the manufacturers know it's an addictive flavor, if you like, most processed food will have both carbs and fat. Foods that have a high amount of sugar and refined starches are very lacking in nutrition and will drive that insulin spike. Sugars that have sugar sweetened beverages and fruit juice really have got very little nutritional value. Fruit juice is as bad as drinking fizzy pop. You know, a glass of orange juice will have as much sugar as a glass of full fat Coke. And the nutritional element is really not worth the sacrifice of having all that sugar. Obviously, alcohol contains quite a lot of carbs and has got no nutritional benefit really. And pure added fats like oil and butter, I mean, butter will have some nutrition in it because it's made from dairy, and there will be important fat-soluble vitamins there. But obviously, if you were having tons and tons of that, you are increasing the energy density of what you're eating, and that's not going to help you if you're trying to lose weight. But we would never normally have butter or oil on their own. We would have them as either part of the cooking process or a little bit dotted onto food to help with flavour. So the least nutritious foods really are the ones to be wary of, particularly are the processed foods and the foods that are very high in sugar and refined starches. So if you get the balance on your plate right, it doesn't matter whether you have a small plate or a big plate, depending on who you are. It's what you need individually to satisfy you with good nutrient-dense food. I hope that makes sense. We can certainly discuss that in the questions. Our take, those of us, Dacia and I, as those of you that have been listening to us for a while, we belong to an organisation called Public Health Collaboration, and they wanted to revise the healthy eating plate that the Department of Health put out, which unfortunately has far, far too much carbohydrate in the form of bread and processed foods. What we would like to promote is that people look at their plate and they should have at least half of the plate with healthy fats and proteins. And then the other half, that is potentially the carbohydrate side, isn't the obvious carbs like the bread and the pasta and the rice. It's made up of the vegetables that contain some carbohydrate, but also have fantastic nutritional value, fiber and vitamins, minerals, etc. And as nature intended it, as opposed to having gone through some sort of processing. So eat real food and you can't go too far wrong. And I hope that's made some kind of sense to you. When it comes to drinks, we would encourage people to drink water, herbal tea, some coffee, but you know, to stay away from all the processed fruit juices, fruit drinks that are really just sugar and water, and certainly fizzy pop and so forth. All of that is really, really bad for you. And when you're cooking, to use naturally occurring oils like coconut oil, avocado oil, olive oil, steer away. Ghee is a really good naturally occurring fat to use for cooking. Stay away from those refined oils. And that's it. So if I stop sharing, I hope that's made some kind of sense to everybody, and see what questions we've got. Hi, Data.
Hi, everybody. Yes.
Back.
Yeah, well, that was great. Thank you, Carolyn. One of the first questions is, what is an alternative food to eat instead of eggs? That's a bit broad.
That's very broad. I mean, that presumably, I wonder if the person who put that is Pragna.
Yeah. Pragna.
Are you vegetarian? Yes. I imagine you probably are. Oh, Daxa, give me some inspiration then.
It depends what meal, I suppose, to begin with. If it's breakfast, then we always say about the Greek yogurt, full fat yogurt, some berries, maybe a few crushed nuts to give it a bit of a crunch.
Seeds, things like sunflower seeds, and
yeah,
some of the seeds are good. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, and as a protein alternative, then if you're vegetarian, if you're not eating eggs, I assume you'd be not eating any of the fish or the meats. So then there's things like tofu, soya, but not really. I'm not that keen on people eating soya, but you know, if it suits them and they don't have any digestive issues, then it shouldn't cause any problems. Can you think of anything else, Carolyn? And obviously our lentils.
Nuts and seeds are a good source of protein, but you do have to watch them. There are some nuts that are very high carb. So we can't give you a definitive list here, but if you can Google anything these days. So if you want to know the nutritional value of any food, just Google nutritional value of, and whatever it is, and you will get nice little charts that show you what the protein and the carb content are. And almonds and walnuts and things like that are at the lower carb end, whereas there are other nuts that have got much more. Cashew nuts have got a lot of carbs in them. So you know, it's a matter of finding the ones that are lower carb. But yeah, you need to rely on nuts and seeds quite a lot, as well as things like lentils, which again can be carby, but in small amounts will give you your protein. And I would just say on the soy front is that although soy technically is a good source of protein, you have to again look at how it's been produced, because there's an awful lot of soy that is being produced that's very planet unfriendly as well as human unfriendly in terms of being processed, etc. So some soy products are okay, but be careful with them. Try and make sure you understand where it's come from, how it's been produced. But you know, I say this time and time again, if you're vegan, it's really, really hard to get your protein up to adequate levels, and you've got to work really hard at it. So it is helpful if you eat some dairy.
Absolutely. Then another question from Sheila. Is it better to eat full fat milk, cottage cheese and yogurt compared to 0%?
Absolutely. You know, it's one of the great marketing cons of the 20th century, the old skimmed milk. When you look at how much fat you're actually saving, it's like full fat milk has 4% fat. Skim milk has, semi-skimmed has 2, and skim milk has less than 1.
Yeah.
But you know, unless you're drinking gallons of milk, that's, even if you cared about the fat, you're not actually saving that much fat, and you're losing all the flavour. But when it comes to yogurt particularly, I mean, I used to absolutely detest natural yogurt because I always ate the low fat stuff, and it just tastes of nothing. Whereas if you get, even if, I mean, we would recommend the full fat Greek yogurt, which can have as much as 9% fat. It's like, it's so tasty. But you can get Greek yogurt that's only got 5% fat, and you can get natural yogurt that's just made from whole milk that's around 4% fat. But all of those yogurts will taste infinitely better than a low fat one. And if you choose your brands carefully, that is all they contain. It's just the milk that they're originally made from. If you look at low fat products, they'll nearly always have something in them to thicken them. And the flavoured ones will all have sugar in them. So steer away from flavoured yogurts and go for the full fat. And the same with cottage cheese, and definitely milk. There's no point having semi-skimmed or skimmed milk. It's, you know, you're depriving yourself of flavour and you're not giving yourself any benefits at all.
Very true, very true. I used to drink skimmed milk all the time until I knew
Me too.
otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you've answered this, because after this question was, which is examples of seed oils, then your slide came up with examples of seed oil. So I feel like we've covered that.
There's one there about excessive fructose.
Is that further down? Or is that directly to you?
Oh, it might be. Yes, it might be. If excessive fructose is bad, does that mean fruit should be eaten only up to a limit? Well, that's what I would probably say. You shouldn't eat anything like as much fruit as a lot of us have been encouraged to eat lately. Fruit has been seen as a healthy option. And what's happening is we're getting fruit that's available to us all the year round, whereas once upon a time, we were only meant to eat fruit when it was in season, wherever we happen to live. And the whole point of that was that we often got fruit, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, in the autumn. You know, our sort of traditional fruits that we grow in this country would be available August, September, October. And we might gorge on it then, and that fructose gets turned into fat in our liver, as I described. And that was to see us through the winter when we didn't have much food. Now we get the fruit all the year round and far too much of it. So yeah, I would say limit fruit. I rarely eat fruit. I eat berries, strawberries, raspberries when they're in season, blueberries. But the rest of the time, I hardly touch fruit. It's kind of become, when this 5 a day thing started, and I have to tell you that 5 a day was made up, some conference or other, when people were trying to think, how can they encourage people to eat more vegetables? I think it was really more how could the businesses sell more? They just come up with this idea. It's not based on any kind of science at all. And the problem is fruit got lumped in with the vegetables, and it's much more important that you eat plenty of and a nice wide variety of vegetables. But a lot of people who don't like vegetables think, oh, well, I don't like the vegetables, but if I eat 5 pieces of fruit a day, then I'm getting my 5 a day. Well, it's all nonsense. And the fruit is not as valuable in the diet as many people would like to think. I don't want to demonize it. I mean, fruit can contain some vitamins and fiber, but the most important thing is that you eat the whole fruit. Fruit juices, of which there is now a massive market, they're basically squeezing out all the goodness, and all you're left with is the sugar. So, as I said, if you're drinking a glass of orange juice, you might as well be drinking a glass of Coke. So if you do like fruit, try to eat seasonal fruit. I mean, if you care about the planet and air miles and things like that, then, you know, I try to avoid anything that's been flown halfway across the world out of season. But if you are going to eat the fruit whole, because then you're getting the fiber and the body is getting a bit of extra benefit, as well as being able to slowly absorb the sugars and the nutritional elements of the fruit. If you just drink a glass of orange juice, all that happens is the sugar in it just goes straight from your stomach. It gets absorbed into the bloodstream and gives you a massive sugar high, which is not good for you. and you're really missing out on all the nutritional elements of that fruit. It's about 6 or 7 oranges in a glass of orange juice. You'd never sit down and eat 7 oranges in one sitting, would you? But when you get a glass of orange juice, you know, you're just knocking back all of that, and it's just not good. So I think we should be cautious about fruit and go for fruits like berries, where the concentration of sugar to fiber is much more even. So the body actually has to work to digest it, and therefore you're getting more bang for your buck, if you like. If you go for the very tropical fruits, you're getting an awful lot of sugar and much less sort of nutritional value. And also, as I say, it's not come from round here, so it's got a lot of air miles attached to it as well. And because of that, they will be picking them and probably unripening them artificially, which again alters the whole thing. So I hope that makes some kind of sense, that, you know, unfortunately modern enterprise, modern commerce has really interfered with how we eat, and our bodies are not adapted necessarily to this, which is why we've got so many health problems.
Pratap asked, what food has more carbohydrate, and therefore what in the name of carbohydrate should we not eat?
Right, maybe next time we need to do sort of carbohydrates, but carbohydrates are anything starchy, so rice, anything made from wheat, so pasta, bread, those sort of products are all high in carbohydrate. Anything that's got a lot of sugar, obviously, naturally, and this again is where processed and packaged food, you need to be careful, because if you look at most packets, even in savoury foods, you'll see that sugar's been added. And then when it comes to vegetables, the root vegetables are more carby than the leafy vegetables, because a root is designed to sustain the plant through its growth, so it contains natural sugars. So potatoes, be they white or pink or whatever, you know, sweet potatoes, unfortunately, they're all quite high in carbs. Now, naturally occurring carbs like potatoes in small amounts are not as detrimental as having loads and loads of highly refined carbs. So all your sweet goods, baked goods, you know, cakes and biscuits and so forth, they're all very high in refined carbs, and they're not giving you an ounce of nutrition, just loads of sugar. Whereas the potato will be giving you fiber and some vitamins and minerals. So in small amounts, that's a lot more preferable to biscuits and cakes. But if, depending on what your goal is, if you're just trying to lose weight, then you modify your carbs, and if you stick to just the healthy, naturally occurring carbs, you'll probably do quite well. Whereas if you're diabetic and you really do care about your overall intake of carbs in terms of your blood sugar, then you're best avoiding the starchy vegetables as well as the refined carbs.
Thank you. Now, this is a great question that's coming up. If cholesterol is not harmful, if cholesterol is not a harmful substance, why do we have to take regular cholesterol tablets for the rest of our lives?
Oh dear, where do we start with that one?
I know.
It's something that I'd encourage you to read about. I've given you some resources. The whole statin industry, unfortunately, again, it's full of vested interest. Probably started off with some people thinking, as I explained before, that fat was bad and that therefore it's bad for you to have high cholesterol levels. It's sort of grown a whole life of its own now, and unless you have had a heart attack, taking a statin is not necessarily going to offer you any kind of benefits at all. But this is where I start to worry, because I'm not here to give you medical advice. I'm not here to tell any of you that are on statins you shouldn't be taking them, to stop them or anything like that, because I can't get involved in individual cases. But I would ask you to question with your doctors how important it is. Now, depending on the doctor, a lot of doctors don't have a huge amount of nutritional training. They have protocols now that tell them that if you've got X or Y, you must take a statin. They themselves don't understand necessarily what the exact benefits are. But unfortunately, more people are taking statins than really need to be. And it's your body and it's your right to question what a doctor is asking you to take. And Daxa and I would say that the vast majority of people on statins do not need to be on them, that if they altered their diet to a healthy, real food diet, their cholesterol would sort itself out to a large extent. But even if you ran on a slightly higher total cholesterol level than the current British guidelines suggest is ideal, the most important thing to ask your doctor is, what is your HDL triglyceride ratio? And if that's normal, there really is no need for you to be on a statin. And if it's not normal and your triglycerides are high, the best way to get your triglycerides down is to reduce your carbs, not to take a statin. I have a cousin who had a heart attack and got cardio bypass surgery, what do you call it? Cabbage's coronary artery bypass surgery, not heart bypass. But basically, he had a serious heart attack. His diet is appalling in terms of carbs, and he's never been advised to reduce his carbs. He's now taking 2 statins, and he keeps saying to me, they can't get my triglycerides down. And I keep telling him that he will never get his triglycerides down unless he reduces his carbs. But he is obsessed with fat, and he's been told, and he thinks that the fat is causing the harm. And it breaks my heart. The carbs have broken his heart, but nobody's telling him that other than me, and I'm not a doctor, so he doesn't believe me. On the other side of my family, I have an uncle who was 100 last October, and he has had a cholesterol that has been running at about 9 for as long as doctors have been measuring cholesterol, and he doesn't take a single medication. He is as fit as a flea, and he's 100. So, I would just ask you to question why the doctor wants you to take it. Question what is your total lipid profile, not just be palmed off with, oh, well, your cholesterol's 6, therefore you must take a statin. You should have a right to know what your HDL triglyceride ratio is. And if your triglycerides are high, the single best way to get them reduced is to reduce the amount of carbs you're eating. Do you want to add anything to that, Daxa?
I was just going to say, I'll try and put in the WhatsApp group something that Dr. Asim Malhotra speaks about in terms of statins, too much medicine, and the great statin con. I'll try and put that in, and then
I have put a link to one of his little talks on the slide, but if you can add a few more. As I said before, Dr. Malhotra is a cardiologist. Dr. Malcolm Kendrick is a GP of huge experience, and both of them, and they're not the only ones. I mean, Dr. David Unwin, who has really pioneered the low carb diet for diabetes and reversed diabetes in well over 100 of his own patients now, is also fully now understanding that it wasn't the fat that was causing his patients the problem. He's used the diet to help control these people's diabetes, but what he's noticed, because he takes bloods to check on all sorts of markers, is all of these patients who've changed their diet, things like the cholesterol levels have improved, their kidney function has improved, all sorts of things have improved just simply by changing their diet to a low carb, real food approach. So, a lot of people are told they must take a statin, otherwise they're in danger of dying from a heart attack, just because their cholesterol level is a bit high, or just because they have now developed diabetes. But if you're given the opportunity to change your diet, then these pills are not usually necessary. So I hope that's helped to answer that for Ela. Is it that asked that one?
Yes. And I was just going to say, sorry, go on, Panna.
Caroline, what I found myself was when I was put on statins, they tried the first one and it didn't work on me. I was having so many side effects. They tried the second one, 3. I think I landed using 4 different statins, and that's what hit my heart. I landed having 7 stents. So I don't believe statins are
So you think the statins did more harm than good?
It did more harm
Yeah,
to me
yeah.
than it did good.
And unfortunately, statins do have side effects in a lot of people that take them. And it bothers me that they're not given, you know, we talk in the medical world about informed consent. And I think an awful lot of people are just told, oh, your cholesterol's this, you must take this. That's not informed consent. You should have a proper discussion with your doctor about what are the actual benefits. And if you do read some of the links we'll give you for a Seymour Hotra, he will show you that if you haven't already had a heart attack, the actual increase in your life by taking a statin is nil. It's not going to prolong your life by a single day. If you've already had a heart attack, and say that there's slightly different criteria, but even then, it's not necessarily offering a huge difference in life expectancy. But there's possibly a little bit more rationale for why you might take it. But this is never explained to people. And also the dietary options aren't explained properly to people. So it's your body and you deserve to have as much information as possible before you start taking medication. And what we are now learning, those of us that kind of are trying to follow more of a holistic approach to health, is that nutrition is at the root cause of an awful lot of our problems. And if we can get that right, we don't need all these fancy medicines. So, you know, if you are on a statin and you are feeling it's giving you side effects, please have a conversation with your doctor. Because, you know, it's not generally essential that you take it. And if you make changes to your diet, that can have a much more powerful effect.
Yes, next.
Okay, so
another great question, Mayuri, she's asked, can we get cold pressed sunflower oil? I
don't think I've ever seen it.
Well, yeah, I think it is available, but I wouldn't advise that it's any health. Well, it's probably slightly healthier, maybe. But the problem with sunflower oil is the profile. So by profile, I mean oils are made of like omega-6s and omega-3. And in our Western diet, the way we eat in this day and age, we have way too much omega-6, which drives inflammation. So even if it's cold pressed, you're still driving inflammation. So I would stay well clear of anything sunflower oil, cold pressed or otherwise.
Somebody's asking about cottonseed and brands. It's not about brands. It's about looking on the bottle. The information will all be there because they're duty bound to tell you. It might be in small print, but just have a look at the back of the bottle and see what it consists of. And it will often say, for instance, you can pick up a bottle of olive oil and it looks nice and healthy, but then if you turn it around, it says made from refined oils, and the same with any of the others. So it's not about the brand, it's about looking at how it's made. And if it's described as extra virgin or cold pressed on the front, then that's looking hopeful. Because those are the healthier ways of producing the oil.
Yeah, but the seeds that the oil comes from is still very, very
sorry,
important.
yes, it is. Sorry,
yeah. So
I
yes,
agree.
cold pressed things is definitely good if it's olives, avocado, coconut, but not for any of the seeds, like the
seeds. Yes, I think, sorry, I'm sort of deflecting slightly, but you're absolutely right. Seed oils are less good and should be minimized compared to the olive, avocado, coconut and ghee. Ghee obviously is not a vegetable oil, it's a derivative of butter, but without the milk solids, so it means that you can cook it at high temperatures and it won't burn. So ghee is a very useful fat for cooking. If you aren't vegetarian, then any of the animal fats are good for cooking. The old-fashioned lards and dripping that got demonized again are very useful for cooking. But when it comes to the oils, stick to the coconut, olive and avocado really. And rapeseed is cheaper. So unfortunately, it's the old adage that if it's really cheap, it's probably bad for you. The better oils tend to be a bit more expensive, but we probably don't want you eating a lot of the deep fried stuff that you might be using the cheaper oils for anyway. So if you're not
Yeah.
eating those foods, you've got less need for large quantities of these cooking fats.
Yeah. While you were talking earlier about the fats and you were talking about the industrial seed oils, I quickly Googled how they're made. Now, first the seeds are gathered, then the seeds are heated to extremely high temperatures, which causes a chemical change in them, which those changed chemicals are harmful to our body. Then the seeds are processed with a petroleum-based solvent to get the oil out of them. And then the industrial seed oil manufacturers use chemicals to take away any odors and smells, because that would be off-putting. And then finally, they add more chemicals to improve the color. So basically, they've done a lot of stuff to make it palatable. That's harming our bodies. And I think if you were to see, I don't know if it's possible for you to Google how seed oils are made. If you were to see the process on YouTube or somewhere, I'm certain you would not put that in your body.
Yeah, quite agree.
And then obviously you've mentioned about frying. We don't encourage frying.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about sauteing. So, I very rarely would just boil a vegetable anymore. I'll either toss things in a little bit of olive oil or avocado oil or indeed coconut oil and roast them, or I'll saute them in a pan with a small amount of ghee or olive oil or whatever. So that adds flavour, and you're only using small amounts of the oil there. But extra virgin olive oil, there's a lot of dispute about whether it should be used for frying. And I think really when they talk about it's bad to use these oils for frying, they're talking about deep frying where you've got really, really high temperatures for a prolonged period of time. If you speak to somebody that's grown up in the Mediterranean where they produce lots of olive oil, they use that olive oil for cooking everything. So I don't think you need to be too worried about using any of the good oils if you're just gently frying something or you're putting, basting something to roast. If you're using a deep fryer, which we'd rather you didn't, because what's going in that deep fryer is probably not what you should be eating. But that's when things like olive oils, they have a lower smoke point, and therefore it's not good to use them. But for gentle frying and roasting, avocado oil, I think, has a slightly higher smoke point than olive oil. Coconut oil is good for that, and ghee is good for that. So I hope that answers that.
There is a question, what is a good cholesterol level to have?
Right, well, again, what are we talking about? We're talking about total cholesterol, because I understand that the modern guidance is that it shouldn't be more than 5, but I'm not bothered. As soon as somebody says to me, oh, my doctor's told me that my cholesterol's too high, I'll say, well, what's your profile? So it's about those ratios. Where's your triglycerides? So maybe we'll try and find a nice little link of the whole lipid profile to put on the WhatsApp group, probably the easiest thing, to show you what the normal ranges are. But doctors should not be allowed to get away with just saying to you, oh, your cholesterol's 6, you must go on a statin. You deserve to have the conversation about the whole profile, and just, your total cholesterol could be 6, but your HDL to triglyceride ratio could be perfectly satisfactory, and your triglycerides could be, in the normal range. And if that's the case, then there's nothing to worry about. So it's not a simple, one figure answer, but maybe we could, as I say, I'll look for a good link for sort of healthy cholesterol ranges for the whole lipid profile. Make myself a note here.
And then somebody's asking, is ghee good instead of oil? But I think we've covered that.
Yeah.
And then 0% fat is the same as low fat yogurt. That's the same as low fat. Am I right? Sorry, just joined now. I make my yogurt at home. Is lactose-free yogurt, milk, something that people should have? Okay to have?
Yes. I mean, if you're lactose intolerant, which some people are, But I haven't looked at a bottle of lactose-free milk yet to see what the fat content is. So the lactose coming out will reduce the sugar in the milk, the carb element of the milk. But I honestly can't tell you off the top of my head what the fat content would be. But lactose-free milk is useful for people who are lactose intolerant, but it's unnecessary for people who aren't.
And then we've got what about homemade yogurt from whole milk?
Yeah,
well, I'm sure
fine.
excellent.
Brilliant, because you won't be adding anything else, so perfect.
Yeah. Then the next question is, are nut and seed oils healthy? But I think we've covered that.
Yeah,
They're not really, unless I mean, we're talking about peanut oils and things like that, so they're not healthy.
no.
Greek yogurt is 0% fat version healthy. We've covered that. No, it's not.
It's not. I mean, unless there's a reason. I think occasionally, if people are trying to reduce their energy density, we talk about energy density rather than calories. Anything that's very fatty will have more energy components in it, but if it's healthy fats, the body will use it very efficiently, so we mustn't be frightened of it. But I don't see the point in 0% fat Greek yogurt. To me, the whole point of eating Greek yogurt is to get that lovely, healthy, satisfying taste that you get from the full fat version. I've just spotted one here. I don't know if you're higher up or lower down the list than me, but about which butter is healthy to use. Benecol. Don't understand that question exactly. Butter should be butter. It is a good opportunity to say any of the spreadables will contain horrible ingredients. So butter that is made purely as from the milk, with nothing else added, maybe a little bit of salt, but that's it. That's fine. Yeah. So good dairy butter. But anything that comes in a tub that is described as being spreadable will have had stuff added to it. So avoid those like plague. Benecol is they put that in yogurts and those little drinks and things, don't they? Which is supposedly to help reduce your cholesterol.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I hope you understand from what we've been saying is that those products are totally unnecessary, riding on the bandwagon of people being frightened of cholesterol. And you don't need it. If you're eating a healthy diet, you should not need those.
Yeah.
And maybe I think there are some margarines possibly in that league, and we would say avoid margarine like the plague, because margarine is made, it might not be made as appallingly as it used to be made, but it's still an artificial product. Margarine was is that the one that was originally designed by engineers for some sort of engines?
It was, I think so. I think they had a surplus of it.
Sort of processing.
Yeah, and then they thought, oh, I know what, instead of wasting this, let's feed it to people.
So steer clear of anything that's
there's some dodgy
been made in a factory, basically.
Yeah. Another great question: how about eating organic vegetables or organic foods?
Well, yeah. If you can, I mean, I'm all for supporting local farmers to produce wholesome food. Organic vegetables will tend to be more expensive, but if you can afford them, then great, because they will have less chemicals and things that they've been in contact with as they've been growing. In order to be classified as organic, the soil that they're grown in has had to go through several years of transition from artificial fertilizers and things being used to then being classified as organic. But yeah, if you can afford them, great. But we buy, I'm not sure if Grewbox, Daction I use, which is a vegetable box delivery service, the farm that produces those vegetables is sort of working towards organic, I think, but they're not necessarily classified as organic at the moment, but they are trying to avoid using pesticides and artificial fertilizers, etc. So by my advice, whether you're a vegetarian or a meat eater or fish eater, is to buy the best quality you can afford. the best thing we can do, in my opinion, in terms of the food chain, is to support local growers. So our local farmers, be they, arable farmers or livestock farmers, they are not getting the best support at the moment from the government, and the supermarkets are driving them really hard to be able to make a living. So the best thing we can do is to support local farmers as much as we can and eat the best quality food that we can in order to help them to maintain a production of good quality food. So I'm a meat eater, but I'd rather eat less meat and eat high quality meat than eat cheap meat every day. And the same with vegetables. I get seasonal, local vegetables.
Is it called group box you get it?
Group box. Now, Daxa and I are based up in South Manchester, so it's a Cheshire farmer and he's just a small enterprise, so I don't think he delivers very far away from here. But Riverford and Abel and Cole are two bigger companies that are nationwide that deliver organic vegetables all over the country, and I've used both of those as well before I discovered this local guy. So it's everybody's position, their financial position is different, and I would rather you were buying supermarket vegetables than no vegetables, but our advice would be to buy the best quality that you can afford, and to try and think about seasonality, because seasonality gives you variation as well, but also you're getting the vegetables when they're meant to be eaten. So nutritionally, it's just better.
Just going back to the organic question, there is a website that the Environmental Working Group run, and on there they have a list of 12 foods that they recommend that we should always buy and eat if you're organic only, or at least from a farm that's at least trying to practice being, coming to the certification for organic produce. And then there's other things that are called the Clean 15. So those Clean 15, it doesn't matter if you never buy organic versions of them, because generally they don't require pesticides. So I'll send a link in the in our WhatsApp group, and then everyone can decide what they want to do with that list. We've got a couple of questions or statements, should I say, about statins. Ela saying that her friend's son, I think, is a doctor. He has no problems, but still he takes statins regularly. Then some Kirti said statins, they've been proven to lower cholesterol. And then what about genetic cholesterol?
Familial hyperlipidemia is a different problem, and I say I don't want to get into giving individual advice here. Now, some people take statins with no problem; they don't have side effects, but there's a huge amount of evidence out there about statins may be proven to lower your cholesterol, but as I've just tried to explain, why do we want to lower people's cholesterol? Cholesterol is a vital ingredient to our bodies, as I explained at the beginning. Cholesterol does not cause the blockages in your arteries. So the whole premise of why people are given statins is really outdated now, but there's kind of a vicious circle going on. But I think gradually people's eyes are being opened to this. So I'm not telling anybody to stop taking the statins, but I would ask you to read more about it. Don't just take at face value that they are necessary for you, and look at your diet. There are no pills in this world that can make up for having a good diet. And if it's your diet that's causing your problems, and the inflammation that's caused by a bad diet is what's driving heart disease, it is not cholesterol. And I think that's the point we're trying to make. So yes, statins might reduce your cholesterol, but what good's that going to do you? Is the point we're trying to make, I think.
And can I just add there, Dr. Asim Malhotra, as we said, he's a cardiologist, world renowned. And he says, if somebody over 60 says to him, they've got high cholesterol, he will actually congratulate them.
Yeah.
And he will say, actually, that's really healthy and much more beneficial.
And again, I mean, time doesn't permit us in these little sessions to show you every bit of evidence we've got, but there's some really, really interesting data that shows internationally the countries that have the highest saturated fat in their diet have often got the lowest cardiovascular disease risk groups. So it's just not as simple as diet and, saturated fat causes heart disease. It doesn't. There's all sorts of other things going on in lifestyle that are going to drive that heart disease. But there are some really interesting papers that show that all-cause mortality is higher. That is, more people die with low cholesterol levels than do with high cholesterol levels.
True.
Does that come across right, Daxa?
Yes,
So,
yes. More
when
people
you look
die.
at cause of death overall, you will find more people are dying with low cholesterol levels than with high cholesterol levels. So we've been absolutely bombarded and brainwashed with the idea that cholesterol is harmful. And we've got to get away from that, because cholesterol in itself is not harmful.
No.
And it's vital to the body's functioning, and particularly brain function. And more importantly, it's not the cause of all these chronic diseases that we're suffering from. And it breaks my heart that we've had 2 years of COVID where it's absolutely clear that the people who do worse from COVID are the people who have got metabolic syndrome and diabetes and obesity. And we have wasted 2 years when we could have been helping people to understand if they can improve their lifestyle and their diets, they will be better able to fight off infections like COVID, as well as being generally healthier. And unfortunately, there's a lot of mantra out there, and people sort of just obsessed by individual little things like cholesterol, when that's not the issue. The issue is the poor diet that most of us in the Western world have now. And it's a poor diet that has developed over the last 50 years. Our parents, I mean, my father's 99 in March. He grew up on a farm in Ireland, and his dietary intake would have been mostly dairy and some meat, but homegrown vegetables. But he'll have had loads and loads of dietary fat in his youth. And he's, was really, really healthy until he got into his 90s. And I mean, he's still going strong physically at 99. So we've lost sight of what good nutrition is. We really have. And as I say, we could look to the animal world and think, well, you don't see animals in the wild becoming obese because they eat to satisfaction and then they stop. The reason why we're all overweight is because we've got far, far too much of the wrong kinds of food, and we eat far too much of it. So we just have to strip back to eating a healthy, naturally occurring real food diet, and that will help an awful lot.
Yes, I think the main thing is, like you've been saying, cholesterol is good, but what we have to keep an eye on is your triglyceride, because that's what hits your heart.
And triglycerides are a result of too much carbohydrate, not fat. It is confusing because triglyceride sounds like a fatty thing, and indeed it is fat, but it's fat that has been made by the body from excess sugar.
Yes. So as Caroline has been saying, do not stop your statins. Take your doctor's advice first, and then you'll think of yourself, think of your body, think what you have to do. So take your doctor's advice. Don't listen to us or Caroline or anybody else. Listen to your doctor. Right. I am going to say thank you very much, Caroline and Daksha. We've had a very good visitors today, and I'm very pleased to see
Yes, the numbers are fantastic.
Yes, the number is beautiful, and I hope to see these numbers again next month. Remember, first week of the month. So we're going to meet up again, and if the subject you want to choose yourself, please write in the WhatsApp group.
Yeah. Yes, because it's actually only 3 weeks till our next meeting because we're a week late with this one. So as soon as you can, any of you, particularly those of you that might be a bit newer to the group, if there's something we've said tonight that you would like clarification on, for instance, maybe I should do carbohydrates. And, you know, yeah, somebody's just put that in. So we'll focus on carbohydrates next month. And then, you know, please, anything else that you do want us to talk about, put it into the WhatsApp group so we can plan and check with you all next time if that's what you'd like me to cover.
Yes. So tomorrow, if anybody hasn't had their wills done and their lasting power, if you're keen on learning something new about it, or you want to upgrade your will, joining us tomorrow, we have a very reputable company called Cornerstone who's going to talk about wills and lasting power. And look out for that link tomorrow in the events group. I have already put it out, but I will remind again. So please try and join in tomorrow and have your questions ready to have the Q&As. And this way it will be all prepared beforehand by the time, you know, our Q&A starts. So I look forward tomorrow as well. The same numbers again, if it's possible. It would be wonderful to see so many people again. And then we've got Valentine's coming.
Yeah.
So Sunday, Colours Radio is going to entertain you for Valentine's. And it is basically, we've hired professional singers to entertain us. So come and join in on Sunday after your tea time and then enjoy the music, romantic music with a glass of wine and not popcorn, but some snacks. That would be nice. And not forgetting, on Saturday is Ekadasi, so try and join in for Ekadasi as well. I'll put the link out soon. So that's my update. And then it's the routine again, Zumba, um, yoga, and then meditation. We've started meditation and it's a wonderful class. We've been having this kind of numbers and it's great. We've got Brahma Kumari giving us sessions and they talk about different things every week. They're going to talk about different things and once a month they're going to keep changing the speaker as well. So try our meditation. It's pure meditation. So that is something worthwhile going into it. I've had the second session and it's brilliant. The first and the second I've had, it's really comforting and I feel fresh after doing that because it's early morning, 9 o'clock. Get up and do that, and it's wonderful. I must say thank you very much to everyone, all the participants for joining in, and to Caroline and Daksha. Devina is still not joining us at the moment because her father is not well, but we miss her as well. And what more can I say but good night?
Night.
Anything
Thanks,
else?
Panna.
Yeah, thank you, Panna, for hosting, as
Thank you
always.
so much. It was very informative.
Thank
Very
you.
Thank you very
useful.
much.
Useful.
Thank you.
Good
Good night.
Thank you very much.
ladies.
Good
Thank
night.
you. Thank you,
Bye.
Caroline.
Thank
you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you very much.
Caroline.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Ricky.
Thank you.
Ricky.
I've been here. I was here listening very intently.
Panavin, I just wanted to ask if you miss meditation,
Yeah.
can I go on the YouTube to watch because I couldn't come last week.
Yeah, you can, but I must warn you,
It's good to come. Yeah,
I mean, it's not as exciting
yeah.
when you are actually there.
Actually in with it, yeah. But
Yeah.
any ones that I miss, I can go, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So what day is a meditation, please? Can I have information about?
Yeah. Who would like to explain about meditation?
It's on Sunday. It's at 9 o'clock, isn't it?
It's at 9 o'clock. And what meditation is, it takes you in a trance and comforts you. You have to take a couple
Yoga in mind. Yoga connecting to the mind.
It is.
Is it once in a month or what? What day is it?
No, it's every Sunday morning. We do it every Sunday morning at 9 o'clock.
Oh, Sunday morning. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Sunday morning. Try and join in. It's wonderful. Patigu. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Lovely
Panna.
to see you
Thank you.
again.
Thank you,
And,
Panna.
You should have come up. I didn't see you. I can't hear you. Unmute.
Yeah, I was listening very intently.
Yeah, because
Especially about cholesterol. Especially having refused the statin. So I'm very pleased with my decision.
Oh, good. I'm